Hello, everyone. Bobby, these are all your friends and admirers.
Well,
Adele, and I'm the Community Relations Director for the Library District for about another month and a half. I'm retiring. So I'm really happy to kind of go out on this program. I suspect that most people in this room have very personal connection to Bob Linder. You're here like me because you have a tremendous admiration for his work and you really value his friendship, as I do. And some of this room have had the joy of working over the years with Bob at the Springfield News-Leader, including myself. We writers always loved working with Bob on assignments because we felt like it kind of made our stories just a little bit better. Or maybe it's because we worked a little harder on our stories because we knew that it was going to run with Bob's work. We all have memorable stories that we did with Bob, and you'll probably see some of them among his favorites tonight. There is so much to say about his career. He was a photojournalist for the Springfield Daily News, Leader in Press, and News-Leader for 40 years. He worked as a staff photographer, chief photographer, photo editor, and multimedia specialist. Throughout his career, he received numerous awards from United Press International, the Associated Press, National Press Photographers Association, Missouri Press Association, and Gannett Company. He was also inducted into the Missouri Photojournalism Hall of Fame in 2012. Bob is a native of Springfield. His father, Benjamin Linder, is well known for his photographs of wildflowers and Ozarks plants and helping to found the Southwest Missouri Camera Club. Bob's interest in photography developed in his teenage years. He recalled, after teaching the darkroom basics, my father left me alone to make my own discoveries and, of course, my own mistakes. This proved to be good training. Bob participated in journalism at Parkview High School and attended Missouri State University. His career with Springfield Newspapers, Inc. began in 1970. Over the next 4 decades, Bob witnessed vast changes in news photography, and he facilitated the transition to new techniques and technology. He specialized in color photography in the 1970s and 80s, and he embraced the newspaper's first digital camera work in the late 1990s and set up the newspaper's digital darkroom. He also placed the newspaper's first video on the internet. Bob's passion has always been photographing the people and places of the Ozarks. The subjects he captured have been enhanced by his mastery of light, shadow, and patterns. He has been called an expert in portrait photography. The people, places, and culture of the Ozarks live on through his work. The Library District is pleased to partner with Bob to preserve his historic photograph collection, the Bob Linder Collection. It consists of thousands of photographic prints and negatives, images of everyday life of the people and historic moments. We're excited to announce that a portion of this collection includes 300 images that are now available on the library's website through the digital archive. You can see them at thelibrary.org/lockhist, that's LOCHIST. Click on digital archives and scroll down to the Bob Linder collection. You can recognize it because his smiling face is on the front. Local history staff will continue to add content to the online collection, but we are excited to debut our newest digital collection tonight. Tonight's program, just so you know, is part of a larger series, which will conclude next Thursday, May 25th, here at the Library Center. Ed Filmer will discuss his career as a video journalist and share some of his favorite stories from the Ozarks. And now, would you please help me welcome our guest, Bob Linder.
Well, got to do this. Fine. You know, I'm notorious for having a 30-minute speaking voice, so between sips of tea and dramatic pauses, I think we're going to get through it. I really want to thank Brian, Ben, and all the team with the local history area who have taken on an incredible task to digitize the newspaper's film archives. It's hard to really put a number on the pictures that must be there. I would say close to 1 million. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And what they've done is so tedious in that, you know, they'll take film, they'll scan it, and they'll literally look through the paper where it was published, put the information with the photograph and the metadata. And what is so important about that is that pictures are just pictures until they have context and content, and then they become history. And it's our history. You know, these photos, I don't think of them as mine or the papers. They're ours, and it's our history. And in a way, they're making a really great family album for us all, because you can search names, you can search places. It's really a great asset for the community. So I want to thank them, and they've been so great to work with. They're enthusiastic and excited to do this. And I'll get a call and we'll talk about a picture if I remember it. And so we got a lot to go through. So some of this I'm going to move through pretty fast so that we can spend time with some of the stuff that maybe is more interesting. Kathleen stole half of what I was going to say, so that's good. But the truth is, I never planned any of that. I don't know if I really had a plan, but when I was a freshman at SMS or MSU, I got an opportunity to have a part-time job at the paper, working nights and weekends, mainly athletics, but really whatever happened. And I was really out of my depth. You know, the generosity of the people who were there, remarkable staff, Betty Love and Art Evans, Steve Keller, and in the newsroom, you know, Doyle Hilton and Don Mankin, and so many, the Billings brothers, Hank and Jim, and it was the newsroom whiz kid who could take pictures and write stories and find pages, Michael Bryan, and you could walk down and look in Paul Palmer's office and see what he was drawing today, and if you liked a certain cartoon, he would give it to you. And it was a great experience, but it was hard. And you know, you came back with a picture, and sometimes that was a situation for a kid whose favorite screw up is supposed to take pictures without filming the camera. Betty Love, when you see Betty's picture, you know, she looks like everyone's nice grandma, and she was kind and generous. But she said, don't ever shoot the last frame in a roll of film and not put another roll of film in the camera. You know, I see this. She could cuss like a sailor, and she had a heart of gold. She could delegate up better than anybody else. After about a year or so, I really kind of clicked into it. I really kind of saw that, you know, words and pictures could be really kind of evidence. And they created something that really works for me. I think, you know, I was not particularly scholastic or athletic in something, and I'm not going to say I was a loner, but I did a lot of things of my own. And the viewfinder, only one person could look at it. And it spoke to me. So after about a year, I thought, I'm going to do this for them. So here we are. I'm doing, actually, for that, I don't have 3 minutes. Listen to 2 things. We've been having a little technical issue that has delayed the starting. No, it won't do. These are not connected.
Okay.
So I'll just cue you and then you advance the slide. Um,
Here we go.
To the library, everyone. Good, I needed a pause.
Turn the lights down. So we can see. They sure do. I'm hoping it turns up a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Don't need to cut out the middle, but let's cut out the middle.
Hey, could you turn up the volume some on his mic?
Oh, boy.
Hold it closer.
Need to hold it closer.
Hold it closer.
Okay.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay, guys. You know, I really used to love the way that the press was, you could look at the press from Chestnut Expressway and see the paper rolling. And I loved going back to watch the press run. But if you look at the windows looking out, you can see City Hall. And that meant City Hall could see the press. And I think, you know, as someone said, don't pick a fight with people who buy ink by the barrel. That's kind of where we're at. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll get the hang of this. One, you know, I didn't know what to expect from the newspaper job, but I did know a couple of things. One, I get in the fair for free. And I was going to come across some trauma because everybody knows the news thing is car wrecks and house fires. I worked from like 3 to 11 and I learned pretty quick about light and about to use the light that's there. And working at night was a great lesson in light. And I knew that I was going to come across people who are having the worst day of their life. And unless you walked across a tornado field, you really don't respect the energy of nature because it is pretty amazing. Maybe if we turned it that way. That's good because it's pointing at me and every time it does this. And you can watch Dateline in 2020 in 48 hours, but until you've really sat through a murder trial from beginning to end, you don't really know the drama and stress of being in a real trial and the fate of people. Athletics is just a really great learning experience because not really being into athletic or sports, but shooting a lot of it. It's a great place to learn because it has a beginning and an end and a winner and a loser. And you have to learn the technical part of getting the action and usually pretty smart, pretty dim gyms. And then you start to look past the action at other things. So it's a really great learning tool. And our neighbors, you know, you run into our neighbors and Payne Stewart, that's the golfer Payne Stewart's mother, who was a real pistol. I really liked her. And sooner or later you run across these guys. And I don't know what to say about them.
Wow.
You know, there's something, this is one of my favorite pictures because it really says something about youth and fun and joy from simple things. And these guys are waiting for a car to come by. I was going somewhere to shoot something, and I was going down Kimber, so I go around the block and I pull in a driveway and roll down my passenger window because it was raining. And I had a really pretty long lens, and I was lucky to get a picture because I was laughing so hard the camera was moving. And on the other side, you know, the disasters that do happen. This is a high regency in Kansas City. I believe that it's still the greatest, if statistics matter, the greatest loss of life due to architectural failure. I was really lucky, and we could do a whole other series on. I had a really great opportunity with Chris Whitley, a writer who's here, I believe, and we did the Missouri River, life along Missouri from St. Charles to St. Joseph, and it was a great experience. And this is in Jefferson City, and we were just talking about the state office workers. And then there's the Ozarks, which, you know, you have those stop the car moments. And this is one of those stop the car moments, which is a real hazard of traveling with me because there's always a stop the car. But, you know, there's a lot of beautiful places, but, you know, the Ozarks are unique and interesting. So always have something to offer. And, you know, anytime it rains in Arkansas, there's a waterfall somewhere. The Quarry Hole is an interesting one. And my wife and I had gone there, and I was doing something else and turned around. The next thing I knew, she was in the water. But it gave perspective. So I tried to, and when I could, have the use of the pictures along with the pictures. And this was, I'm sorry, I'm doing a dual system here. You know, elk sightings in Buffalo are pretty common these days. But there was a time when elk were gone for about 100 years until the Arkansas Fish and Game Commission traded the Colorado Conservation Commission largemouth bass for elk. And Fred Bell, whose picture is there, and others, he worked for the Arkansas Commission. Volunteers took their pickups and cattle trailers and went to Colorado and brought back the elk. And they have propagated well. But, you know, the thing I enjoy most, you know, one thing I didn't really realize also about the newspaper work is that you did so many different things and you worked in so many different mediums. At one time or another, we used small format, medium format, large format, black and white prints, color slides, reversal prints, Cibachrome prints. You did virtually everything. And I really enjoy, though, people, and I enjoy photographing people. And the people who would come through town, the people who live here, the people who live in the hills. This is Elvis's last tour. Later that summer, he passed away. Oh, I'm sorry. I got my things. There we go. I'm dual minding here, so. And, you know, his show was great. And I'm not a big Elvis fan, but he loved it. And the crowd loved him. And he played and played. It was a really long show. Victor Borge, the Dutch-born comedian, pianist, and conductor. This is about 1975, I think. He was known for enjoying playing small venues. And, you know, at that time in Springfield, well, he was playing in the Central High School auditorium, which is where the Springfield Symphony played too. For a while, I was thinking the symphony played with him, but now I don't think they did. I was looking it up through newspapers.com for the story, and I think he was on his own, but he was great. And I recall that he really brought, you know, the crowd, they really loved him, and they were all roaring in laughter except one homesick Danish exchange student who was in tears.
Oh. Wow.
George Foreman. You know, in 1973, George Foreman defeated Joe Frazier for the heavyweight championship of the world. But the next year, he lost to Muhammad Ali. And so 13 years later, in 1987, he's decided to start again. And he's to start from the bottom. And the bottom meant fighting Bobby Crabtree at the Hitch and Post Lounge on Kearney Street in Springfield, Missouri.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, he had a little press conference the day before that was pretty sparsely attended. And he was very humble and very kind. And he said, you know, new guys who want to work their way up have to start at the bottom. And there's no reason an old guy doesn't have to also. And people who started, who tried to make a comeback again, started too fast, too high, and they crumbled. So he said, I'm not embarrassed. And so after the conference, I had some little light set up like in the next room. And I said, could I just take a quick portrait of you? And he said, sure. And we went over and I took a few frames and he was on his way. I can get this right. In 94, was so many years later, I guess in 94, he defeated Michael Moore to regain world heavyweight champion of the world. So he was a real comeback kid. Nick Gregory, he was a comedian, civil rights activist, later in life, a protest for various social causes and conspiracy theories. But he spoke 2 times at Drury University, and I photographed both times. The first time, we were just in a meeting room upstairs, but the second time I kind of hung in there and listened to his speech. And afterwards, we were backstage, and there were a couple of people talking to him, and right above him, there was a bare light bulb, and it made this lovely light. And you know, there's something about film. There's sometimes the way light can just etch that film. That's just really hard to duplicate. I mean, about half my body of work is in film. And if you're going to ask me, I'm going to tell you digital images are way better than film. I mean, they're just beautiful. But there's a quality about film that is hard to duplicate. And then this last year, I've been shooting film and processing film and making prints again. And, you know, it's been a real joy. You know, you can't just hit print and print it out. You've got to go in the darkroom and make it happen. And I printed this negative. I wanted to make a print or two of it. Kathleen Turner. Kathleen, very early in her career, I think she had just finished her first film. I think it was after Body Heat, certainly not into Jewels and Nile, but she was at the PBS station, which at that time was KOZK Drury. And Peggy Sorek interviewed her. And actually, that's not the picture that ran in the paper. And the other picture actually was chosen for MTPA annual book called Year in Pictures, but I liked this one. There was something about this one that, for me, I enjoyed. So that's the one I'm showing. Charlie Hayden. Bill Tatum interviewed Charlie Hayden in the lunchroom at the News-Leader. He had come back to town to visit his mother who lived in Forsyth. Charlie started his musical career at 4 years old, playing with the Hayden family on KWTO radio. But by now, Charlie was considered the world's renowned jazz bassist and had made a name for himself with Ornette Coleman and Keith Jarrett and Ernie Watts, and later with Pat Metheny. I found him a mesmerizingly interesting man. And, you know, he recently passed, and I found it really quite sad. He came to the Ozarks on a regular basis, and he has 3 triplets. Not 3 triplets, he has 1 set of triplets. In fact, one of them is married to the actor Jack Black. They sing and they have a musical group. So maybe there could be a Charlie Hayden Day in Springfield and the Hayden triplets would come and perform. That would be kind of fun. Mikhail Gorbachev, 1992, Mikhail Gorbachev visited Westminster College, which if you recall was where Winston Churchill gave his Iron Curtain speech. And he was going to speak at the very podium, and he walked through a section of the Berlin Wall that Winston Churchill's granddaughter had made into a sculpture and is installed at Westminster College in Fulton. 20,000 people came to listen to him in speaking in Russian with translation. It was really long and it was really hot, but he thought that the world had come full circle and that there was an end to the Cold War. Yes, things don't work out. Leroy Olds. Really looked forward every Memorial Day at the National Cemetery to see Leroy Olds because he had this great face and he fit so trimly into his World War II uniform. And, I want to think back on those Memorial Days at the National Cemetery in the 70s and 80s and the Pearl Harbor survivors in their Hawaiian shirts and how things changed. But anyway, I really enjoyed Leroy. Alvin Jones. Alvin Jones was 87 and he farmed along just south of Greenfield since 1922. I was driving south of Greenfield and I saw him working in his garden, and I actually knew Alvin because he was a friend of my father's, and he was a really interesting man. But the backstory on Alvin is that he had a degree in geology from the University of Missouri, and he loved collecting mineral specimens. So in the off season from farming, although we know there really isn't an off season, but let's say the slow season, he and his wife would take their pickup out west and he would collect minerals, and he had an incredible collection in his barn and in his silo and in his house and all around the yard. And he said, it was really dry. I remember he said, this was the driest he can remember since '54. This is about 2001. And he said, my dad said, '01 was awful dry though. I love passing along of human memory, I mean, human memory is really flawed. I know that as well as anybody, but when they pass that first person memory along, I find it just precious. This was an Amish wedding party, setting up for an Amish wedding party. And we had gone with a friend who was dropping off a gift at this farm in Seymour. And this isn't a published picture, it's actually just mine. Hanging from the window on the right is the wedding dress. And I was really surprised by the ornate glassware for the party. But when she went over to light the candle, I took the photo. I know what you're going to say. I took the photo. The camera went off. I'm really, the texture of rodeo I find really fascinating. Any kind of cultural area like that, it has its own things. And this was the page. I missed the vertical page. I found the vertical page for displaying stories and pictures just right. And in this was 95, I think. For a while I did what you'd call a column with a camera, and I'd kind of sold the editor on that. And once a month I'll do this. And where to put it, I don't know. We have to understand with on a newspaper press, at least that one at that time, only certain parts of it could run in color. And usually there was a section fronts, like the front page, front of sports, front of the features. But that also meant because, it's one piece of paper that wraps around, that the back page does too. So I was watching the features section, and there were just kind of some continued stories, some jump stories, and a couple ads. So if you could clear those, I'd like to have that one because I knew that could be a color position and I could have the whole page. Later on, they moved it to the front section, then there'd be a column across the bottom, usually O'Brien's column, and he could get wordy. And I think which would take space away from me. Maria Akers was a widow who lived in Pulaski County. In July of 1967, there was a terrible munitions accident aboard the aircraft carrier USS Forrestal off the coast of North Vietnam. And planes were staging to take off in attack. And as I read the story, there was a missile in a plane that fired, accidentally went off, struck another plane, caused a fuel leak. There was sort of a munitions chain reaction. There were 134 sailors were killed. Among them was Maria's son, Paul. The story had been done on the phone, and my son was really just to run up to take a photo of her. So, so I got there, I found it, and so we just talked for a while because I didn't really know what to do. And she was packing, and it was going to be the longest trip she had taken since moving to Pulaski County from Germany with her GI husband. And she told me how she had saved a portion of Paul's Thanksgiving dinner in the freezer for so many years. And she asked if she should take this flag that was on his coffin. And I said, sure. When she wrote, put her face on it, it was the hardest thing I've ever done, I think, raising a camera. But I'm glad I did. And it was cool. It was all right. But I had recently had a loss in my life. And I was kind of there with her. And I learned from Maria that there are certain losses we have that you learn to live with, that you don't get over. Okay, we're going to move on from that. I really enjoy this. This is Doc Dasher. And I had an assignment to go to, there was a senior center on St. Louis Street. This is about 1980, really cold winter day. And I went up and went in and I don't remember what I was to take a picture of, but off to one side was Doc and another person and people surrounding a piano, and they were singing happy birthday to somebody. And so when I was finished taking my picture, I went over and sat on the couch across from him because it was cold out. I wasn't in a hurry to go outside. And I just kind of got my gear packed back up, and we started talking. And he introduced himself and I introduced myself. And he said, Linder, are you related to the Linder that had a recording studio on Boonville in the 30s and 40s? And I said, well, yeah, I am. That was my father. So I recorded there, and several of us recorded there. And that started a conversation about his career. And, you know, you don't know who you're sitting across from. You just don't know what you're sitting across from. And this began the journey, and I got Mike O'Brien interested in doing the story, and we went and he told us about his career as a songwriter and performer, and he was very popular in the 40s at night spots in Springfield. And he had pinned, Columbia Records had asked him to write a song about the news in 1925, the news story of the day, which was the Scopes trials. And so he wrote to songs which he played. One was Evolution Mama. And the other was West Palm Beach Blues, I believe. And everybody also gave a really interesting view of those times in the 20s and 30s. And as a musician and as an African-American man. And I found that he was just delightful. I got curious. I was searching around the internet and I found the songs, and they're there and you can play them. And actually, an English music company has put a copyright on them. I'm not a copyright attorney, but something seems wrong there.
Yeah, I'll say.
Joe Gamble. You know, my first visit to Joe Gamble's service station was in the passenger seat of my parents' car. And if you remember, the service station attendant would come out and he would squirt the stuff in your windshield, and then they'd rub this thing around and they'd wipe it clean. I loved that. But later, as a driver myself, I would stop. And he was just such a smart, intelligent, such a kind and outgoing man, and just someone you didn't forget. You really want to remember most is sort of that mutual respect between the service provider and the customer. Something that is probably lost. Sorry, I have to read my notes a little bit here because. You know, by the late 70s, Joe still operated the service station. And you could tell it was towards the end of that era. But Joe learned the service station business from his father, and Joe worked there while he went to Central High School and then Drury University, where he studied engineering, and then at Yale University, where he studied engineering. And he worked for a period of time for Continental Oil Company, but he came back to Springfield and his family and his friends and took up the station that his family had operated. You never know the backstory until you ask. So for a while, the newspaper was doing a thing, I don't know if you remember, but we'd take an old picture and then take the new picture, and you could kind of slide it back and forth on the internet, you know. And usually I pick something from the 50s or, you know, that era. But in this case, I had taken the old picture. So I knew what lens I used, and I kind of knew where I stood, which was the trick. You needed to stand where the photographer was to get the right perspective. And then usually, if you're working from a different format, like if the original was a 4x5 and you're shooting with a digital camera, there's some issues there and you've got to mess around with it. But these laid down exactly right. And, you know, I wonder if the people who eat at Subway think those glass tiles are trendy, but that was so light for his garage. I really enjoyed him. He was very tall, like 6'4", 6'5". And if you asked him, how tall are you? He would say, 5'17". The term family restaurant usually refers to old-fashioned food served late lunch style at bargain prices. That certainly describes the fare at the Ozark Cafe in downtown West Plains. But there was an unusual aspect of this restaurant that set it apart. The Gables ran the Ozark Cafe, the same Gables, for more than 57 years. Got ahead of myself. Virgil and Nona. They bought the place in '46. Virgil was the fry cook and the dipper upper, and his wife Nona was the pie maker, bread maker, and meatloaf creator. And she kept the books. Virgil shows up in time about 7 a.m. for the 7 a.m. crowd. And Nona said, he loud enough to where Virgil could hear in the kitchen and the people at the counter could hear. She said, he gets here about 6:30 or 1/4 till. It depends on how long he has to work on his corns. She thinks of listeners. Virgil barks back. I'm 3 weeks older than her, but it doesn't make any difference in fussing around hard. The daily plate lunch specials on this day were $2.60. And that buys chicken fried steak, an ample portion of mashed potatoes or gravy, cream corn and Spanish slaw, and 2 portions of Nona's bread. One of the customers at the counter said, we're taking up a collection to buy Nona a bigger dinner table. If she retires, we're coming over for dinner. I really have an affinity kind of for country stores. I'm not so much in the antique part of it, but they're sort of a cultural hub. And, you know, they really, I've come across, I'm going to do 3, I'll kind of go through them quick. This is in Olga, which is in Webster County, kind of on the direction of Seymour. That's Cora Kendall, and she carried on this tradition of her grandfather's store. And she would sit in the window there and when there weren't customers and just survey. She had the first telephone, the second car, and finally this would be the last business in Olga. However, I have heard recently that the store has been reopened. The old phone was there, and it was a pretty good place. I think I'm advancing it, but I'm advancing this and I'm not advancing that. In Osage County, 100 years before Missouri 83 was paved, there was a sharp bend in the road that became known as Crook. And a settlement sprang up there. Became a landmark and a trading center. By 1979, when I took these pictures, the hitching posts were gone and the livery stable and the post office. But Louis Backlese was still there, amazingly so, and so was his general store. The merchandise had dwindled to some hardware and household items and a few canned goods. It was, but you know, in those stores you could buy a head gasket, or you could buy the Tums. Or, you know, what else do you need? A few weeks after these photos were taken, Lou passed away in the back of the store while he was making lunch. And I felt really lucky to have crossed paths with him. He had run the store since 1916 when he came home from World War I. You know, I just see these pictures all differently now than I did then. You know, a few months later, there was an auction and it attracted hundreds of people to see what was in the store. And because they had been there as children or they had heard about it, or they wanted to go see it one more time. And there was an amazing array of things, including this World War I helmet, which was there. Women's straw hats, vintage 1925, in original cartons, shoes, straw hats, work shirts, underwear, wooden buckets, hand tools, parts for tractors, and a keg of gunpowder. One store that is was really interesting, and in really great shape was the Bunch Grocery, the Bunch store in Kingston, Arkansas. And it was still operated since 1880 by the Bunch family. And this was Joel Bunch started, I'm sorry, I'm getting myself mixed up. The Bunch family members and Hugh and his wife Pauline were in the store. An interesting feature of this store was the wood burning stove. And he said you could get a lot of heat if you rolled a lot of wood in it, but you don't want it too hot because it attracts loafers. But he said it was fun, and he was gracious. It was interesting because it was very orderly. It was a great store, really. And there was, the new stock, and the old things are kept there. And you really felt like it was in a time capsule. You could buy a saddle or an ox yoke or fabric or feed or anything. I'm just an ordinary person, said Bertle Mannon. She was 88 from her modest cabin near Bradleyville in Taney County. It's been her home since 1916. Isn't that funny? 1916 is a good year for her. She had moved there with her parents who homesteaded from Nebraska. She was a sweet lady and lived there. I thought it was interesting in that I considered those wild grapes, she called them possum berries. And this is really hard to describe unless you know what I'm talking about. But my grandmother was born in 1900, and the people from that era, I love their dialect. And, the true Ozarks dialect. And it's not an accent. It's not a hillbilly accent. And it's more about the words they say, the words they use, and the way they say them. I mean, my grandmother always called a paper bag a poke. You may have heard that before, and that kind of terminology. She lived a simple life in her 2-room cabin. It didn't have the modern conveniences that most of us think we just can't live without. Diane Majeski wrote this story. I like working with good writers because for 2 reasons. One, they make me look good, and 2, because they can run interference. Because I kind of like to be low key. When a photographer walks into a room like this, there's a wake follows as they come in, and I would tend to kind of hang in the back and kind of take it in and kind of figure out what to do. And in this case, Diane's a really good writer, and I love the way she wrote this. She said the cabin now was a ramshackle structure of lumber and logs tilting precariously, held together by a lick and a brayer. And that really is the power of putting words and pictures together. And that's why, the written word, the printed word, and photos are a powerful medium. That's very similar. Bertle graduated from Ava High School in 1935 and attended Missouri Teachers College, which is now MSU. She had been a teacher, a rural newspaper correspondent, but for the last 30 years lived in this cabin alone. She did share it with her mother and sister, and they passed. But, it's interesting. Something she said that kind of stuck with me. She was asked if she was lonesome. And this, I've met 3 people like this who lived alone in cabins, and to a person, she said, I'm well satisfied. I've never been lonely a day in my life. I hope that's true. I kind of call these people the children of the pioneers because their parents generally were homesteaders or from that era. Eva Barnes Henderson, on her farm in the Buffalo River Valley, known affectionately as Granny Henderson to many from that time to this, with her dog Bobby. She lived just out of sight of the Buffalo River, near the spectacular Hemden Hollow, just right near what we call Goat's Bluff. And that was a problem because this had all been designated the Buffalo National River, and she was going to have to move. Federal agents had contacted her about selling her property, her 167 acres. She said they came out here one morning while I was turning out the cows, and they said they aimed to buy my land, and that's what I thought of it. I don't think much of it, I told them. I said it kind of short because I'm in it short. Finally, Granny came to an agreement with the Park Service. She said, when you work hard for something, you naturally hate to see it go. Of course, I don't like it. But I guess a lot of the rest of us don't like it either. And I want everybody to see the river who wants to. But Eva Barnes Henderson passed away less than a year later on July 10th, 1979. And her cabin still stands there. And it's used for hikers to take a rest break. I've only been there one time since. And I've sat on the porch again and I've looked out over the valley, which is pretty much the way it looked when she was there. Excuse me. As with the story of Granny Henderson, the Boxer Valley nearly suffered a similar fate. It is a 7-mile long, maybe half-mile wide, upper Buffalo River. It has an agricultural area that much of the rest of the river doesn't have. It is near the headwaters at some of the highest hills in Arkansas. It has log cabins and white painted homes. And it's really interesting in that the Department of Interior originally, like with Granny Henderson, had the plan to make this all natural. The Buffalo River should be all natural. And then about halfway through it, there was a change of heart, and they considered these cultural landscapes. Officially, the Boxley Valley Historic District is defined by law as a historical landscape, and it is privately owned, yet administered by the National Park Service. And that means that these acres can remain in private hands, but they are subject to easements for roads, water quality. The parks people determine what kind of changes can be made to the structures. (30 minutes has passed. Former assistant superintendent Jim Wiles was a really important presence because they had asked many landowners to leave, and now they're asking if they wanted to come back. And as you can imagine, there was an enormous amount of bad blood. Jim was a really smart and kind man, and he helped implement the Boxley Cultural Land Use Plan, which helped these people come back and set up the covenants and to keep it a forever private area. Jim really had a great rapport with a lot of the landowners in the Boxley Valley, and has an excellent book called Old Folks Talking, where they gave historical outlines of their families and photos, and it's a great resource. It's really fascinating. Ophelia Duty was born in 1898. She served as the Boxley postmaster and was a great source of historical information for Jim and for the valley. This is Violet Hensley, and she's with the fiddle she made in 1934 in her home in Yellville. When she made that fiddle, she was 17, and the date of this photo, she had made 64 violins. Excuse me, I'm kind of losing my voice. The world discovered Violet Hensley late in her life and came to her door, and she played the Grand Ole Opry at 99. Last I heard, about a year and a half ago, Violet was 105. So she was showing me how she made her violins and her parts, and the doorbell rang, and it was Hellman and Molly Pyatt from Fayetteville, and they're musicians. And the next thing you knew, the guitars and the fiddle came out. Violet excused herself, went in the back room, put on her clogging shoes, and brought out a jawbone. And it was the truth. Religion in the Ozarks is nothing less than interesting. This is Carl Pruder, and Bishop Carl Pruder was a bishop in the Christ Catholic Church, which, as I understand, is a small denomination splinter from the Catholic faith, and therefore his church, being a bishop, could be considered a cathedral. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, it was the world's smallest cathedral. It was 14 by 17. Seated 15. But Bishop Pruder was a very interesting and well-read and a writer. He had published several books and had mass on a regular basis, and had a Spanish mass. And this is in the mid-1990s. In Ash Grove, it was Christmas, January 7th, in which, according to the Gregorian calendar of the Orthodox Christian Church, this was Christmas in the Theotokos Unexpected Joy Christian Orthodox Church. Small but loyal congregation squeezes into the church of Father Moses Berry, who is one of the most interesting people I know. He's a joy to talk to, and he was the founder and rector of the church. He's a co-founder of the Fellowship of St. Moses the Black, a group devoted to linking ancient African Christianity and the African American experience. He is also the great grandson of enslaved people. And in fact, he and his family today live in the home that his grandfather made or built, I'm sorry. He also, get ahead of myself here. He also, for many years, operated a storefront in Ash Grove, which was a museum. It was the Ozarks Afro-American Heritage Museum, and it's a small storefront that collect artifacts and photographs that illustrate forgotten history of the area. And many of the artifacts are from his own family. On the Christian County line is the Lone Star Church of God. At that time, it wasn't in use except for one day a year when they had a reunion and people came from all over the country back to the church in their childhood, and they had a picnic and a service, and there was a reunion. And it really felt like a time capsule. The church is beautiful. It has twin wood burning stoves and this great lapstick wood furnishings. In winter of 1984, I worked with a writer, Steve Cusick, who was a really pretty interesting man and had a great feeling for words and people. And he wanted to do a series on the 7 poorest counties in Missouri. And so I tagged along with him, and it was a real eye-opener to me. And George and Thelma Alexander huddled next to the stove in their home in Turnerville. Collecting water from the cistern. It's a single dad with 4 children. But in an interesting turn, it also included Henry Gore, who lived along Blair Creek in the backwoods of Shelby County in a ramshackle house. He had a spring in the back for water, no electricity, no plumbing, no television. But he was another one of those children of pioneers. He lived with his parents until they passed, and he stayed in the house. His quotes are pretty great. He said, it's a bad old winter, Henry says. We might be going back to the bad weather. And this is where Steve Cusick wrote. I'll go back to this. Steve wrote, the hard weather is on Henry's face. The creases have been baked and frozen into his weathered face, and this winter will leave its markings too. His eyes are wintry eyes, icy blue and honest. His eyes are summery eyes, captured little pieces of clear summer sky. Sorry. His beard is grizzled, and Prince Albert has left a honey brown stain on his mustache. So you don't need color photography if you have those kind of things. This is Jim Ellison with 2 of his 10 children and his fatigues and his rifle and his Bible. He was the spiritual leader of a group in a piece of property called Zarephath or Eve. They're also known as the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord. I'm sorry, I can see it. You know, communes and or special areas where people live in community is not unusual in the Ozarks. In fact, the one at East Wind in Tecumseh I found really interesting and realistic. And this was, like those in some ways in that they lived, they built their homes, they lived rustically, they had large gardens. And they lived simply, like anybody in that situation would. But it had one sinister turn. The covenant, the sword, and the arm of the Lord was a far-right, survivalist, anti-government militia associated with Christian identity. And they expected God to destroy what civilization as we know it. They converted guns to illegal automatic weapons. They constructed an armored car. They stored cyanide. They built a mock silhouette city in which they practiced killing the enemy. And would train people. People would come there for that training. It wasn't evident when Kathleen and I were there, Kathleen Liddell, who wrote this story, how sinister it really was, except it was very peculiar. We could probably spend the rest of the evening talking about this, and I don't really want to, but their church service was looked normal until you looked at the walls. And then you realize they had put their assault rifles on the walls. So a few years after these pictures were taken, there was a traffic stop on Highway 65 and 86. There was a van with Idaho plates, and two Missouri State troopers came forward towards the van, and the occupant jumped out and killed Trooper Jimmy Linder outright and injured Alan Hines, and set off the biggest manhunt in probably Missouri history that included the National Guard and pack helicopters, and everything you can imagine trying to find David Tate. At the same time, the ATF, the FBI, and the Arkansas Attorney General were wanting to break up CSA. And there was indications that Tate was headed towards the CSA compound, and there was a standoff for several days. When they finally did go in, they found weapons like this. And a control box for Claymore Mines property. It's a picture of the armored car they had built. So, a lot of things happen in the Ozarks. You really never are sure what is over the next hill. In 2006, the company I worked for decided that they wanted to try what they called non-daily publications. And the goal was to basically magazines. There was a parent and family magazine, there was a home decor magazine, there was a lifestyle magazine. There wasn't a lot to it, but I tell you what it did for me. It gave me a chance to really kind of refine my photography a little bit, to kind of add a little more quality, because it was a really high quality print publications, and what you saw was what you got. So the better product you could start with, the better it was. And it was actually a lot of fun the years that we did it. There was like the food, fashion stuff. But there's also things I was used to, like sports, action stuff. The Mahonies. There are two homes in Springfield that are designed by E. Jones. And Bob and Joyce commissioned Jones to build their home. Jones was a disciple of Howard Wright. Well, Frank Lloyd Wright.
Frank Lloyd Wright.
Got two things going on here. Frank Lloyd Wright. And the really interesting thing about those homes is that as with Wright, Jones did as with Wright, you know, the architect designed the home, designed the furniture, designed the light fixtures, designed the mailbox, designed the tables. I mean, you brought your clothes in the pots and pans. And it was a really beautiful home. There are two in Springfield. And he had a thing about bringing the outside and the indoor, inside and outside together. Matthew Hobbs was a young architect in Springfield, internationally recognized. He's really making a name for himself, and he had designed this home and some others. Had the chance to there photograph people again. Sometimes I wonder when I'm going to hear someone say, "Now, who is John Q. Hammonds?" How quickly we erase people. And one of my favorite people, I got this out of order, I'm so sorry. Mark Trimble, his family started the Shepherd of the Hills farm. Then he went on to Fantastic Hybrids. And then when he retired, he became a collector, and he collected great things. He had a great car collection. He collected outboard motors, but he also collected aircraft, and he had some really beautiful aircraft. And he was we actually did a couple of different air-to-air shots. That's him flying his Ryan. The Ryan is a beautiful craft. And there was a point where we had 3 aircraft up and had these two Waco, 2 different closed cabin and open cockpit, both beautiful aircraft. And that was a fun shoot. I mean, this isn't survivalist or poverty or things, but this is kind of good for me. I needed this. And I really learned a lot from it, technically. And I think what I learned as much in those few years as I had maybe the 10 or 15 before. And even went to South America with our local chocolate maker, which is, he's one of the most interesting people I know. And then I loved that suspension bridge so much, he took my picture. So that's the picture they're using on the landing page. Pretty good. So thank you. That's all I have. I know I just dropped it mic too many times.
Well, I think if you're willing to stay, we would love to ask some questions.
Sure, if you know, there are a lot of my former colleagues here, and I really thought you guys would have enough of me, but there will be no fact checking.
What date do you have for the Splash Boys photo?
Boy, if you wouldn't ask me, I'd know that. It's on film, so I'm going to say 96. 97.
We had two competing dates for this photograph, in 1994 and 1995, which is the most frustrating thing you could ever have in a photo archiving project. And it was one of the most beautiful photographs that we had
It
found.
ran in the paper, but it ran in black and white. So
Yes, this-
because one of those color position things, there wasn't a color position. You remember that, Dean? I came across it, came back, I got this, wanted to run it, but there was no color position. It ran the locals page 1, but in black and white. But it's okay in black and white. Yes, sir.
Was it unusual to have subjects, after you took the pictures, reject and not let you say, I do not run this, I'll sue you if you do, anything like that?
No, I don't recall that. I mean, I remember that, I think. You know, there were people who weren't crazy about having the picture taken, particularly in a courtroom, being taken into jail, being arrested. But that is the real estate of the news business.
What was the most difficult person you ever had to get the persona that you saw in them into the photograph you were taking?
Well, you know, I'm not good at things like this, you know, I know that happened. There were some people who were just really great, and then when the camera came up, they would just freeze. And, you know, it's kind of sad but true. Yes.
That there were images or moments that touched you out of, which of course would make sense, but was it in the moment? Did you realize how significant it was to you, or is it now looking back at it?
I had a moment with Maria. You know, and I also knew that that was the moment, you know, and I thought we had enough of a rapport that I felt it was okay, and it was okay. If it wasn't, she would have told me, and I wouldn't have used it. I wouldn't have taken it.
I have talked earlier about your early career, how you got started, when maybe all the way back to when you first had some thoughts that you might want to take some pictures. Did you? I came a little late. Did you talk about that?
No, just a bit, in that, you know, I think it was along about my freshman year of high school, I realized that I wasn't really a very good drummer. And that I was a better photographer, and I enjoyed it because it was a singular experience. And somehow it just worked for me, it spoke to me.
And did you go to special schooling or anything?
You know, I did not, you know, I just hit the ground. Yes, friend.
Back in the days when there were morning, afternoon paper, did you ever have to, hey, take photos of this for the morning paper and get different but good photos for the afternoon paper too? Save aside.
That's true. You're asking me questions.
That's what I was wondering if you could.
I know that sometimes, you know, when I worked evenings, you know, the staffs competed,
Yeah.
you know, and I know that there was complaints that their good stuff's going to the morning paper. We're not-
But sometimes your photos are used both editions, right?
Very often, they
But
were.
different photos.
Yeah, yeah.
Both have to be good.
Well, good is a relative term. You know, but you know, the other side of that is having two staffs is really great. I mean, when you had a big story like the David Tate Manhunt, I mean, that was huge. I mean, there was attack helicopters flying around Branson streets and long lines of tourists getting their trunks searched, and you know, it was insane. But we could put, I think we had 9 photographers at that time. Everybody was in the field. Everybody was gathering, and every film was coming in and processing. That was a really great asset. I mean, nobody could touch what we had because we had such manpower.
And what was we? News-Leader?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I'm sorry. Right.
I have two questions. One is, do you have advice for amateur photographers? And the second one is, would you ever consider putting a book together of your photos and your stories?
I'll answer the second one first. No. Because, you know, my friend Dean Curtis has just done a beautiful book on the horses in Shannon County. And, you know, he has worked so hard to get those books out there and get them in place, and I don't have the patience. And I don't want to end up with a garage full of books. For amateur photographers, you know, the beauty of digital is that it has allowed so many people to be creative. It has taken the black art away from photography. You know, and I don't worry about, I mean, as a photographer, if I had a shingle hung out and I was trying to be a professional photographer again, you know, you still have to know what to point the camera at. But the beauty of a digital camera, and I love my phone camera, it's probably my favorite camera, is that it allowed people to be so creative and so many pictures to be taken.
I want to thank you for sharing all these images. As I was growing up in the Ozarks, you were the reason why I grabbed the newspaper. I wasn't a reader, but I was a visual person. And even before I saw your program tonight, I think I knew what you were going to include. And they were many, many of my very favorites.
Well, that's very nice. I didn't know what to put in this, honestly, because we could go in a lot of different directions. I mean, there's a lot of pictures the last 50 years. I think, Brian, I brought a hard drive to them, and well, I did it in two groups. In August, I brought them about 20 years worth of negatives, and then I spent most of the fall trying to organize the 70s, which are a nightmare. It's fine. It's fine. And I think that hard drive I brought after those had 50,000 images on it. Yes.
Our house, it was a treat to pick out the Linder photo. Paper, and you tried to see if you saw a Bob Linder photo. But what was your most challenging, being photo editor or out shooting freelance and stories?
You know, I think being the photo editor is harder. And because you just want to go do it yourself. That's a sign of a really poor manager, I know. I like being out. I like being out there. You know, I like interfacing with people. And I like, you know, I just had a camera bag. I usually just had the singular camera bag. In there, there's one camera body, 3 lenses, and a flash. So when I walked in the room, the challenge was, how do I use the tools I have to get this picture? Where is the light? Where is the action? How do I bring it together? And I love that challenge with just a few tools to do that.
Yeah, when I was photo editor, it was easy because I had a Bob Linder I could send out. Great picture.
You mentioned, and I'm paraphrasing, the death of the vertical page. And of course, a lot of that has to do with the way we get news now online. That also leads to the death of the printed page and the decrease in size of newspapers. The stories that you told for 40 years aren't really being told, at least not in that format anymore. And I wonder what you can say about the future of recording small town, small city stories and what's going to happen to those stories.
I don't know, you know, Caitlin's Ozarks Alive website is great. She does a great job. And you know, format is format, but it'll eventually read the same way one way or another. I just really miss the vertical format in the page because I think you kind of did this. And you know, like the cowboy thing. You know, if I felt like I get one really strong picture, I can build everything around that. And so, yeah, I don't know what to say about that except RIP the printed page.
A little continuation of my previous comment, but everything that you do is just wonderful, but if you could only pick one to represent you, what picture comes to mind?
You know, I kind of like the splash boy picture, but you know, it's funny because, you know, Bertle and Granny and Henry Gore and Louis Beckley, it's people that kind of feel like my family because they've been around for so long. And I've been looking at them for so long. I kind of feel like, you know, they're part of my world. You know, funny. Yes, sir.
Advice would you give to a young person like that's in college that's majoring in journalism and is starting off on their career right now?
You know, be able to do it all. Be a writer. Be a writer first. You can learn to take pictures, video, audio. You've got to be multimedia in this world, you know, and that makes you valuable. If you're going to be an image-only photojournalist, it can happen, but it's tough. Yes, sir.
Did you ever get fooled by a picture that you thought just wasn't very good, but public or colleagues made it insistent that it was great?
I don't remember anybody insisting a picture of mine was good. But, you know, sometimes you don't really realize the historical significance of something at the time. Plus, we are our own worst editor. Whether you're editing your text or your pictures, you've got to let someone else look at it. I don't care how good you think you are. You've got to get another perspective on your work. And if you don't, you're really probably missing out on something. Yes, Ed.
How many more stories do you have in your future and where can we see them if you do?
You know, there's still,
Answer the question.
you know, I don't really have a medium for telling a story. You know, I see things from time to time. I take a lot of pictures. I have to have an avenue for something to somewhere for it to go before I just tell myself a story. I don't know. I can't answer that. I take pictures every day. I've taken a lot of pictures this year. I was telling my poor wife who tried to all this picture talk. I think I've really done a lot of pictures this year. I spent a lot of time on this and trying to get my stuff to the library in a timely manner and trying to be available. And I kind of like a photo break. Probably won't happen. I still have to stop the car. Yes, Chris?
I know that people are wondering what was the best part of working with Bob Linder if you were a reporter, and maybe they're not wondering that. But I'll tell you what it was. It was he had the best cars. They were different, I think, every week. And I discovered that on the first assignment that I was paired with Bob. There had been a tornado go through Tecumseh, Theodosia, West Plains, kind of along that line on a Friday night. And we were sent on Saturday morning to go cover the aftermath. And I found myself in the cockpit or the passenger seat of Bob's Jaguar. And I had never gone to West Plains so fast in my life and back.
Wait a minute, you always made me drive.
Yes.
Besides CSA and things like that, what was one of the more challenging to convey stories that you had? One that you maybe were caught off guard by, or you didn't know really how to tell the story with a camera when you were in the moment?
Um, I don't know how to answer that.
I'll accept an email later.
Okay. I will, I want to say one more time that the work that Brian and Ben and his team with all these negatives, they're just doing a remarkable job, and it's a real credit to the community. It's a real asset to the community. I just snapped the pictures. They belong to all of us. This is our history. This is our heritage. And, like I said, pictures are just pictures, so that content be context. And they're giving them the content be context. I'm just supplying the pictures. Yes, ma'am.
So how much of your job was covering routine, everyday city hall meetings, those kinds of things? How did you bring the interest to those? How did you bring those kinds of things to life?
A lot, particularly city council. You really look for the emotion in anything. I think, and this doesn't just apply to journalism, this applies to art. The essence of true art is emotion. If you don't make someone cry, laugh, get a response. If you just lay something out there and okay, then you haven't done it. But if you pick their curiosity, if you pull an emotion from somebody, then you've kind of done the job. And it's not always possible. Yes, Mr.
Tell a Hyatt story.
I don't tell our story.
You think it's bad.
The News-Leader covered that. It's all right.
And Kathleen tell it.
Oh, Kathleen can tell it. Okay, essentially this is it. The Hyde happened in the afternoon on a Friday night, and we got dispatched up there. And it actually was kind of late. And there wasn't a lot to shoot, to tell the truth. And I had gone one direction, Kathleen had gone another. She was interviewing people. I was trying to get a picture of something, anything. And she had made friends with Red Cross people, interviewing them. And they offered that we could take water and snacks into the rescue workers inside. Now, there's some shenanigans there, I know, getting inside, but went in long enough really just to take a few pictures, get a sense of it, and get out. It was not a pleasant experience. I know for some time later, what I saw there really bothered me. I could go there. But we got lucky, and this is where working with a good reporter is an asset, in that I wouldn't have anything except the confidence that she had gained from her subjects.
I just wanted to say something about the mind of Bob Linder. Every summer school would get out and I'd just go back to the photo, and he and I would commiserate and say, what do you want to do this summer? And he always came up with an idea. The first one was, Schoolcraft Expressway out here is named after Robert Schoolcraft, guy back in the 1700s who wrote a diary going from Potosi down to Springfield, and he found this creek that he thought, oh, this would be a great place to settle a town, which ended up settling Springfield. Bob said, let's trace his trail. let's follow his diary. So how long was it? 10 days? We went,
And you know, the backstory in that is the schoolcraft was looking for lead or,
and we met all these people along the, we had no idea what the stories were gonna be,
I like
but
that kind of story. You know, Steve and I did schoolcraft, and with the help of Bill Rafferty, who wrote the book,
right.
who really lined out where.
It was all you though.
Went.
I mean, you were.
And we got out the county maps, and Milt helped us a great deal and gave us contacts too. I like that kind of story. Steve and I also did Highway 76
Next
you
time
know,
we
across the state, and where it's rural and then where it's Branson Country Boulevard and then on out, and the diversity and the people who live around.
But your eye, I discovered your eye on those trips. And that's when in the middle of this ridge road on 76, he would suddenly say, stop the car. And in the middle of the highway with hills this way, I was sitting there in my car. I didn't have any Jaguar driver around. Jumped out, and then he would say, drive up a little bit and I'll catch up with you. So I drove up the hill and he'd shoot his picture and run up. It was, I learned more about photography from this guy than from anybody else.
Well, you know, I like this, and Chris and I did the Missouri River
Yeah.
and the White River, and the White River was fascinating. And that was, you know, those kind of trips are so interesting and have so many stories, and people love them. And it really, you know, it's really, and those are, you know, all in the, well, if they aren't, they will be. You know, they've just started pouring pictures in, and there's a lot to do. And
It was a good time, man. I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too, Steve.
Bob, thank you so much for your.
Thank you for coming to the program tonight. Please be sure to join us next Thursday, right here at 7 o'clock. We have Ed Filmer going to be talking about his stories of video journalism here in the Ozarks.